To other tensions now, which remain high in Yerevan, the Armenian capital, as the opposition has announced permanent protest after the government surrendered the breakaway region of Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Many people gathered to demand Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's resignation, but they were met with resistance from security operatives. Dozens of people have been detained by police. On Wednesday, Azerbaijan said it had halted its offensive after Armenian separatist forces in Nagorno-Karabakh agreed to a ceasefire whose terms signals the area would return to Baku's control. Well, let's move on to some other stories. The United States says it's in touch with India and Canada after Ottawa accused Indian government agents of having links to the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia. The White House says it rejects the idea of a wedge between the U.S. and Canada on the issue. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Thursday called on India to cooperate with an investigation into the incident, reiterating that there are credible reasons to believe that Indian agents may have been behind the crime on Canadian soil.
From the Canadian Prime Minister publicly about the allegations, we went out publicly ourselves and expressed our deep concern about them, our support for a law enforcement process to get to the bottom of exactly what happened and to ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable. I'm not going to get into the substance of private diplomatic conversations, but we are in constant contact with our Canadian counterparts. We are consulting with them closely. We support the efforts that they are undertaking in this investigation, and we have also been in touch with the Indian government as well. And I will leave it at that for today, only to say that I have seen in the press some efforts to try to drive a wedge between the United States and Canada on this issue, and I firmly reject the idea that there is a wedge between the U.S. and Canada. We have deep concerns about the allegations, and we would like to see this investigation carried forward. I'm not going to get into private diplomatic conversations that have either already happened or are going to happen on this topic, only to say that we have been and will be in contact with the Indians at high levels on this issue. It is a matter of concern for us. It is something we take seriously. It is something we will keep working on.
And still ahead on the program, King Charles and Queen Camilla in Bordeaux City for the final day of their state visit to France. Please stay with us. Welcome back. South Sudan President Salva Kiir is appealing to the international community to help refugees and displaced persons who cross into his country. He made his appeal during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, adding that the crisis in Sudan has created an influx of Sudanese, which has an overwhelming effect on border communities and is causing a humanitarian crisis.
South Sudan has received thousands of Sudanese refugees and our returnees since the conflict broke out in the Sudan in April 2023. This influx has overwhelmed our border communities and created a humanitarian crisis. I'm appealing to the international community to avail resources to help refugees and displaced persons who cross into South Sudan. While the world is dealing with multiple crises, we call for a provision of sustained support to these displaced persons as we work on how to restore peace and stability in Sudan. We acknowledge the political, humanitarian, and security challenges we have faced as a country since 2013. However, we have turned the corner with the signing of the revitalized peace agreement in 2018.
And Guinea's junta leader, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, has addressed the UN General Assembly in New York, saying the Western model of democracy does not work in Africa. He told world leaders that the continent is suffering from a model of governance that has been imposed and that Africa is having trouble adapting to its reality. Colonel Doumbouya took power in a coup in 2021, ousting President Alpha Condé. Defending his use of military intervention, he said he took that action to save Guinea from what he called complete chaos. Guinea is among a number of countries in Western and Central Africa that have seen coups in recent years, including Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger Republic, and Gabon. More from New York. Africa Missions Global, a faith-based non-profit organization founded in 1996, has held its first edition of an initiative known as Horizon 2033 in Manhattan. The initiative, targeted at impacting 100 million lives by the year 2033, is founded by the visionary of Africa Missions Global, Pastor Mrs. Folu Adeboye, and her husband, the General Overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, Pastor Enoch Adeboye. It's also to empower humanity through charitable causes of providing education, water, healthcare, and empowerment, especially for women and children. Our correspondent, Anne Wawodo, reports.
The inaugural edition of Horizon 2033 in Manhattan, New York, opens with guests from all walks of life coming together to celebrate the vision of this initiative. It begins with the unveiling of the new brand visual.
The new brand visual, you say, is not just a design. It is a representation of our spirit. It symbolizes the boundless energy and determination that fuels our mission to drive positive change worldwide. It stands for young lives aspiring to reach their full potential and embrace the values that underpin community and nation building. However, we cannot embark on this journey without acknowledging the challenges that lie before us.
The visionary, Pastor Mrs. Folu Adeboye, explains the inspiration behind Horizon 2033, connecting it to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations.
Horizon 2033 aims to impact 100 million lives in Africa and globally by 2033. We will do this through community-based social intervention programs that focus primarily on making value-based, inclusive, and equitable quality education more readily available to historically disadvantaged communities.
The role of faith-based organizations cannot be overemphasized.
There's a lot of challenges around the world. We know the impacts of the climate challenge. We know the impacts of the COVID pandemic. We know the impacts of many unsolved conflicts, which are really crippling our continent, not because we're the cause, but because we happen to be the unintended recipients of the outcomes. And for that, I think the solutions really lie at the community. And so having community-based organizations and faith-based organizations work together with business, with governments to deliver is very, very important. After all, change is what really starts at the community level.
For the First Lady of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Senator Oluremi Tinubu, the best legacy to leave behind is one that will have a ripple effect.
Africa is a great nation, is the giant of nations. But this is the way to start. The partnership will get from here. And I was discussing with my parents in the Lord this morning before we entered the room. I said, I don't want to build any building. I just want to invest in lives. And I think with the Renewed Hope initiative we started is one life at a time. And life is very, very important. Buildings will crumble, But as long as you have blood flowing in your veins, you keep going.
For charitable causes such as this, great partnerships are important.
At the African Export-Import Bank, we believe that the only way we will achieve the SDGs is if we can trade with one another. And how do we trade with one another? We need to produce. How do we produce? We need to educate our youth. And the vision and the objectives of Horizon 2023 fit into the objectives of the bank in that regard.
This vision of Dear Mommy Gio is one of those opportunities that we have to accelerate in the area of education, especially the giving of quality education.
When we all determine that I will do something, the world will be a different place. It will be a better place.
Governors of Lagos and Akwa Ibom State launched the initiative, pledging their support.
Bane of agriculture is actually the rural areas. So we're doing just that, and it coincides with the vision that Horizon 2033 has. So we'll be pleased to work with them. It's such a big work that you're doing, Mommy. It's lofty vision, but I trust God that as in all other visions of the Redeemed Christian Church, this is already succeeding and it will continue to succeed.
This also fits in clearly with our own vision as a state. And I'm truly glad that at this time we can join you. We can join you with all of the goals that have been set by other world leaders. The Sustainable Development Goals 2030, the African Agenda 2033, the Horizon Vision 2033. It speaks to one thing, that all of us need to work collaboratively together, and we need to do it quicker, faster, and bigger.
And life patron of African Missions Global.
The life patron of African Missions Global, Pastor Enoch Adeboye, who has supported his wife on this journey through the years, believes that the vision is achievable.
When a man living in a room in a slum part of Lagos tells you that God said he's going to build him a city, what will you call him? If you don't say a madman, you say a dreamer. Well, whether we believe it or not, God still being on his throne, within the next 10 years, African Mission Global will have touched at least 100 million lives.
With a successful outing of Horizon 2033 and several impactful initiatives over the years, the African Missions Global hopes to continue its mission of attaining the Sustainable Development Goals, thereby creating a better future for children in Africa and the world at large. From Manhattan, New York, Ann Nwawadu, Channels Television News.
In the meantime, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu is urging nations across the world not to use human rights advocacy as a weapon to stop African nations from taking steps needed to reform their economies. According to media aide to the president, Jurin Galale, the president stated this when he met with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, on the sidelines of the ongoing 78th UN General Assembly in New York. He said Africans are facing great challenges of those he described as scavengers, ravaging the continent's lands and oppressing its people on illegal mines, taking our gold and mineral wealth back to developed economies by stealth. Meanwhile, the president also met with top U.S. government officials and Nigerian business leaders during the U.S.-Nigeria Business Roundtable at the Nasdaq Stock Exchange in New York. Our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, has more.
Business leaders from around the world gathered at NASDAQ in New York City to discuss U.S.-Nigeria business relations.
We see Nigerians coming to the forefront of the American business community on a daily basis. It's truly exciting. It helps us understand your culture. It helps your culture understand ours.
President Tinubu gave clear indication that he is ready and open for relations with U.S. and Nigeria to grow even further, and that Nigeria is prime and ripe for business opportunities.
Let's partner. What you know of the Central Bank of Nigeria of day before yesterday is gone. is a new dawn. For Nigeria, we are determined. We just don't want to go it alone.
Leaders and government officials from Nigeria and the U.S. discussed business relations. Nigeria Exchange CEO gave an impassioned speech about why it's important that the U.S. and Nigeria do business together, and specifically spoke on a partnership between Nigeria Exchange and NASDAQ.
I'm honored to address this esteemed gathering today, representing the dynamic partnership between the United States and Nigeria. The address will seek to explore ways by which the Nigerian capital market can unlock increased prosperity for the Nigerian economy and maximize the return on capital for the investor community through government support and partnerships for growth.
The U.S.-Nigeria Roundtable ignited much passion from both the U.S. and Nigeria as discussions focused on being able to build partnerships and to increase business opportunities between the two countries. Also noting that trade is going to be key and important for both Nigeria and the U.S. From New York City, Maria Bird, Channel Television News.
To other stories now, Samoa will be hosting the 2024 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM, in October 2024 and has announced its theme, One Resilient Common Future, Transforming Our Commonwealth. Prime Minister Afioga Matafate says Samoa will bring a unique perspective to the table. It's the first small island developing state from the Blue Pacific to host CHOGM. Organizers of CHOGM 2024 say the aim is to strengthen resilient democratic institutions, upholding human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The theme also aims to create resilient economies that support recovery and prosperity, a resilient environment to combat climate change, and resilient societies to empower individuals for a peaceful and productive life. With the war in Sudan showing no signs of abating as yet, the United Nations is raising alarm over the health risk of children and refugees. This next report takes a look at the humanitarian situation in parts of Sudan.
This is one of the few medical facilities still operating in the Sudanese city of Omdurman. Civilians trapped here amid the raging war between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army are struggling to access medical care. With a severe shortage of necessary medications, especially for the people with chronic diseases, some patients have suffered complications such as amputations, according to health officials. Nearly 6 months into the conflict, the country's healthcare sector is on its knees due to direct attacks from the warring parties as well as shortages of staff and medicines.
Because of the war, the medications are not available, and so the complications began to show, such as amputating limbs, which happened to a number of patients, as well as the effect on kidneys.
Residents are also struggling to make ends meet, with many unable to afford as little as a loaf of bread.
We have not received our salaries for 4 or 5 months, which created an abundance in food products of all sorts, including wheat, as well as other products. But the real problem is that people are not able to buy because simply they don't have money.
Sudan has the highest number of internally displaced people globally, according to a recent report from the international NGO Save the Children. At least 7.1 million people, including an estimated 3.3 million children, are now displaced from their homes across the country, more than double the 3.2 million IDPs prior to the conflict that erupted mid-April. Diseases including cholera, malaria, and fevers, as well as malnutrition, are threatening millions of children. The United Nations said this week that more than 1,200 children have died in refugee camps since May, with thousands more at risk.
On the back of a cruel disregard for civilians and relentless attacks on health facilities, UNICEF fears that many thousands of newborns will die between now and the end of the year. 330,000 children will be born in Sudan between October and December. They and their mothers, as you heard, do need skilled delivery care.
The United Nations also says ethnically motivated attacks have killed hundreds in Sudan's West Darfur region. More than 1.8 million people are expected to flee from Sudan to 5 neighboring countries by the end of the year. Tensions between the army and RSF, which jointly staged a coup in 2021, erupted into fighting over a plan to integrate their forces as part of a transition to civilian rule. While several countries have launched mediation efforts, none have succeeded in bringing a halt to the fighting.
And human rights lawyer Amal Clooney and world leaders are pleading for more attention to be paid to the war in Sudan and for accountability in fighting that has killed thousands and displaced millions of civilians. Mrs. Clooney is special advisor to the International Criminal Court prosecutor on the situation in Darfur. She describes the violence that broke out in Darfur in April of this year as tragic. The event was hosted by the US, Canada, Gambia, Norway, and the United Kingdom to bring attention to the Sudan conflict and ensure justice.
In April of this year, war returned once again to Darfur. Almost 4 years to the day after a peaceful protest movement dislodged Omar al-Bashir, the former president, now wanted by the International Criminal Court. Since that time, at least 5,000 people have been killed across Sudan, 12,000 injured. There are credible reports of rape and gang rape, some incidents taking place in public and some involving children as young as 12. The tragedy that I am describing is one that we've seen before. We literally could be having this conversation 20 years ago. Targeted ethnic violence, the burning of villages, mass murder and fleeing civilian, that was Darfur 2 decades ago. And now this nightmare is unfolding again. Why? We all know it's because those responsible for the crimes were never forced to answer for them.
And while the atrocities in Darfur are clearly being perpetrated by the Rapid Support Forces and allied militias, we should be clear that both sides, including the Sudanese armed forces, bear responsibility for plunging Sudan back into war. So we repeat our call to the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces to end this bloodshed and negotiate a permanent ceasefire in good faith, because it is Sudanese civilians who are bearing the brunt of this brutal conflict.
Still ahead, Argentine students create stunning mosaic tribute to World Cup hero Lionel Messi from 90,000 plastic bottle tops. Plus, we'll get more on the Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky's visit to Canada. VOA correspondent from this after the break. Let's move ahead now. A new study by Bielefeld University in Germany and the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, which is politically aligned with Germany's Social Democrats Party, has found that the number of people in Germany holding right-wing extremist worldviews is rising steadily. This rise is said to have doubled in the last 2 years, as 8% of people questioned showed a clear right-wing extremist attitude compared to between 2 and 4% in the previous years. A conflict researcher who worked on the study said that they were surprised to see that people who had become lonely during the COVID-19 pandemic were becoming receptive to extreme right-wing views. And for more on this, we're joined by DW's Arthur Sullivan, who joins us live from Berlin. Good to see you. What are the main findings of the study?
So this study has taken place for the last 20 years, and every 2 years it aims to take a snapshot of views, political views and otherwise, in Germany. And the big headline this year is really relating, as you said, to right-wing extremism and a rising hostility towards democracy. So of the approximately 2,000 people who were interviewed, 8% held clear right-wing extremist views, not far-right views, but extremist far-right views. So that's relatively small overall, but it's still 4 times as much as in previous studies. A similar number support the proposal that Germany should be a dictatorship and should be run by a single strong party with a strong leader. And just to again reiterate, that's 8% of people holding that really extreme view. And that's more than double what had been previously polled for that particular position. Not surprisingly, given what I've just outlined, the study also reveals a falling level of trust in government institutions. And while the majority in Germany, the vast majority, still support democracy, of course, around 2 in 5 people, according to this study, now hold views which are aligned with conspiracy theories.
And a far-right party, the AfD, is currently polling at record numbers in Germany, along with studies like this. Is it a cause for alarm in the country?
Well, given Germany's history as a perpetrator of the Holocaust, as the aggressor in World War II, there has always been, in its post-war history, an acute awareness and a sensitivity in Germany towards the rise of far-right movements. So it is a cause for concern, and there is certainly a heightened awareness right now because of studies like this and, as you just mentioned, this clear rise in support for the far-right AfD party, who now are polling at more than 20% nationally. There have also been some other incidents in recent times which have illustrated the momentum and prevalence behind far-right views in Germany. One of the big ones was last year, December 2022, when police uncovered an alleged coup plot by an extreme far-right group known as the Reichsbürger movement to actually overthrow the German government. Now, that was a shocking incident to a lot of people here, and it helps to build this perception, along with the rise in support for the AfD, that there is increasing momentum behind far-right movements. Now, it's important as well to say that in some parts of Germany, as many as 1 in 3 voters currently would give their preference to the AfD. But it is important to put all of this in context. This study, as with previous studies, does confirm that the vast majority of Germans and people living in Germany remain committed and firmly committed to democracy. And in the case of the AfD, more than half of all voters say they would never support the party. So there is still a strong support for democracy in Germany.
Right, Arthur, so does this study give us any indication of why this is happening and what can be done about it?
Well, the authors of the study say that it's really, there's a rising perception in Germany that the country is beset by a range of national crises, from a struggling economy on many fronts to disagreements about the level of immigration into the country. And they also say that there's a link between those who feel they're most affected by these crises and the likelihood that they will then hold these extremist views. There's also been a connection drawn between what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic and the rise in anti-democratic movements. So we saw things like anti-vax movements, also demonstrations against restrictions that were placed in lockdowns at that time, and a rise in support for anti-democratic, anti-mainstream views. Now, it's also important to say that many countries in Europe are experiencing issues with the far right, and also another study this week from the University of Amsterdam suggests that as many now as 1 in 3 European voters vote along anti-establishment lines, whether that be far right or far left or populism. And as for what can be done, well, the big challenge for mainstream political parties in Germany is to battle misinformation online and to better articulate their own positions. But it is important to say that the authors of the study say that in perceived times of crisis like we have at the moment in Europe, whether that's the war in Ukraine, a struggling economy, and this sort of post-pandemic inflation, cost of living crisis, that all of these factors combined have created a perfect storm which has made the appeal of far-right positions stronger and potentially more dangerous in the years ahead.
Many thanks, Arthur. We're staying in Europe. King Charles and Queen Camilla have left Paris and are now in Bordeaux, where they greeted crowds at the town hall in the French city on the final day of their state visit to France. The royal couple also visited a British frigate moored on the river of the southwestern city to discuss defense cooperation and a wine-producing chateau. They spent the first 2 days of their stay in Paris visiting Notre Dame Cathedral and attending a banquet in Versailles, hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron. The visit aimed to boost relations after several tense years over the negotiation of Britain's exit in 2020 from the European Union, and after that, rows over issues ranging from immigration and the sale of submarines. And finally on the program, students from the Nuestra Senora de Lourdes Institute in Granberg, Argentina, paid homage to soccer legend and World Cup winning captain Lionel Messi with a huge, breathtaking mural made entirely from plastic bottle caps. Working alongside artist Sebastian Ramirez, the group unveiled the work, which features Messi's victorious moment holding the World Cup, complete with 3 stars denoting the country's 3 victories, and the message, "Thank You, Captain." The mural's incredible attention to detail can be seen, including Messi's tattoos. According to the students, each cap was diligently painted and the outline of the picture mapped out in advance. Over 150 students were involved in the production of the mosaic, contributing to the planning, preparation, separation of the caps, and meticulous image creation using about 90,000 of the bottle tops. The project included 6 school classes as well as enthusiastic volunteers, all dedicated to working as a team, creating astonishing art and honoring their sporting hero. Well, that's it on the program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. Bye for now.